Most of you know that I am really not a fan of individuals who have this tendency to take certain Bible verses out of context because it means that you end up missing out on what that Bible verse is really about. And one of those stories that pops up frequently around this time of year is the story of Christ as he is cleansing the temple. Now, a lot of people have taken this story and maybe gone down some different paths that are a little bit interesting. Some people will highlight the fact that Christ, during this story that we will get into, is clearing out people who are doing business in the church. And they'll say, well, clearly this is God saying we shouldn't do business in the church. But that's not really what's going on. But there's one more thing that sometimes is even more disturbing, and that's individuals who will try to rationalize that this is showing Christ's anger and how he somehow condones violence. And I'm sorry, but violence isn't something that you're ever going to find condoned in the Bible. And it really is a shame because sometimes in people's attempt to make the Bible say what they want it to say, they end up missing out on what the Bible is really trying to say. No, this story is not about saying that violence is okay. And in fact, I would argue that anybody who wants to say that it's about trying to condone violence, even for righteous causes, is actually somebody not reading the Bible for what is actually intended to be, but instead just people trying to rationalize their own obsession with violent things. Instead, what we actually learn when we peel apart this scripture is that this is a story that talks about sincerity and how we approach different religious events. This is such a pertinent lesson for Easter and Christmas or any other major Christian holiday. But before we really get into this story of Jesus cleansing the temple, first I want to talk about this concept of sincerity. You see, this is something that we see talked about over and over again in the New Testament. Christ is constantly citing something that's in Hosea 6:6 that says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Well, this phrase is something that calls us to have the correct heart, not just to do the religious thing that a lot of people seem to get obsessed with. You see, it is possible for us to do all the right things, for us to show up on Sunday, us to do Christmas, us to do Easter, and to do all of the right actions, but to have a heart that isn't really pursuing Christ. And in doing that, we're missing the point. We're trying to maybe pursue religion for some worldly reason or validation instead of what God really has in store for us. Because the blessings God has for us is not founded in just worldly practice of religion, it's in the heart. And so Christ desires our heart. You can see this very pertinently explained in Malachi. Now, it's across the entire book of Malachi, but you guys will focus on something that you end up seeing in Malachi 2. And what you're really reading in this section is how God is speaking through the prophet Malachi to the actual elite, the people who are the church. And he's explaining to them that he does not, the same concept, that he doesn't desire just, the symbols and the actions that go along, but he actually wants your heart. And he actually goes as far as to say that he would profane in a pretty disgusting way the sacrifices that the temple is offering rather than have them continue to do it in an insincere way. As you sit here and you read these passages in Malachi, I want you to think about that concept of sincerity. And more importantly for us in our world today, maybe what is the role of the church and our role towards each other in helping ensure that we approach these celebrations with a sincere heart that is pursuing God rather than just hearts that are just pursuing empty religion. Now that we've talked about the concept of sincerity and how we practice these celebrations, these festivals of, Christmas, Easter, any other thing that is in the name of Christ, now we can actually talk about this Jesus clearing the temple. Now, some of you may have heard me use that reference and you didn't know exactly what I was referring to. And if you haven't heard the story, you'll read it here in a second. It pops up in a couple of the Gospels, but the one that we're going to look at is the one in Mark, because there's a little nuance in there, a little detail that it adds that I think is important. Now, I already mentioned that people misread this frequently. Some people will look at this story of Jesus seeing individuals doing business in the temple and then getting angry and clearing it out. And what they will do is they will look at this and say that this is, pushing back against commerce. And there's certainly something to that, but that's a little bit too simplistic of a read of what's really taking place here. Other people will say that it has something to do with, righteous anger, and that maybe there are conditions under which we are justified in using violence for righteous causes. Oh yeah. But what we actually see in this story is Christ looking at individuals who are coming to the temple, who want to participate in this festival of Passover that's about to take place. And he sees other individuals getting in the way and other individuals cheapening what's taking place. Even more than that, what you're going to end up reading here in the story is that not only were people doing things to maybe cheat individuals, to charge them exorbitant rates for sacrifices, and charge them, unscrupulous exchange rates for money in the temple, but you actually see that the priests and the scribes appear to have actually condoned this behavior. And in condoning that behavior, what you actually are seeing in here is not only an action of certain individuals doing things that Christ finds distasteful, but you actually see this systemic action of what would be the church at that point in time failing the individuals who want to come and worship. They're prioritizing the conduct of this religious ceremony over the heart that is intended to go with the observance of this most critical event. And I think that this is even more important for us when we consider Easter, because the celebration that these money changers and that these vendors in the temple complex were profaning was the celebration of Passover. And that lines up perfectly with what we see during Easter, where we would know that Jesus Christ would be considered the Passover lamb, the ultimate blood that would provide us redemption from death. Holidays and celebrations are an amazing thing. I mean, there are times of fellowship, there are times where we draw closer to each other, draw closer to our family, and times where we have so many different cultural things that we do. But all of those things, if we're not careful, can become traps that cause us to get distracted from what these celebrations are truly intended to be. This is a time where we should enjoy ourselves. It's a time where we should get together, we should laugh, we should joke, we should enjoy family, we should enjoy great food, we should do all of these different things. But in the midst of all of that, we should ensure that the single most important thing that we are actually observing is what Christ did for us, not what our culture did for us, or not what we would do for each other. The purpose of Christmas is not that we show hope and charity to one another. It's that God sent His Son to this earth in corporal form so that He could dwell among us. And the completion of the promise that was begun on Christmas would be realized on Good Friday with the death of Christ on the cross, and then proven to us once again at His resurrection. This is a time that cannot be trivialized. It's a time that should have God at the zenith, as with every time, but especially during these times. So as we sit here and we start marching into this celebration of Easter, I want you to consider these two things. First of all, as a church, are we doing what we should be doing? Are we helping each other to get in the right mind and heart space so that we can be prepared to receive the blessing of the knowledge of what Christ did for us? And the second thing is, as individuals, are we allowing our own hearts to be put in the right space, or are we getting distracted by all the other things that this world would throw at us? Because Christ desires mercy and not sacrifice. He desires our hearts and not just our participation. And so this holiday season, let's ensure that we are not just simply participating in Easter, but we are actually experiencing and once again renewing our hearts which reside with Christ, because that is how we are actually going to be able to experience the fullness of blessing that Christ gave us when He died on that cross. That's our lesson that we have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. And until we can meet again, God bless.